Hi, everybody. My name's Tanya Bannister. I am the president of Concert Artists Guild. I'm incredibly happy and excited to have this incredible panel here today. We have started this live stream conversations in the hopes of having real chats about what we can do to break some stigma and to expand the possibilities and to really talk about the issues facing modern classical musicians today. We are talking about multifaceted careers, and I'm very happy to have Sarah Whitney, who is a violinist with Sybarit 5. She is a 2011 winner of CAG, and she is in the throes of really building her own very diverse career. She has started her own interactive concert series in her hometown, right, in Concord, Massachusetts, called Beyond the Notes. And she's an educator. She does workshops and master classes all over the country, including the great institutions like Curtis, Juilliard, NEC. So we're very happy to have her. We have Jessica Meyer, who is an incredible violist, composer, and she's really a great educator as well. And she's very, very relevant to the modern music scene these days. And then we have Adrian Fung, who I've seen talk a few times, including at APAP. And we're really happy to have you here visiting from Oklahoma. And he is also an alum of CAG, and he won with the Aviara String Quartet in, what year was that? 2008, yeah. And he came on a scooter today because he has his fractured foot.
Not from playing.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just want to welcome everybody on the live stream, and I'm going to hand it over to our host, Sarah Whitney.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here, and I'm really excited to have you all on this panel. We've got 3 people with incredibly unique careers, and I'm just going to take just a minute to just talk a little bit more about them, but then really hand it over to them to talk more in depth about what they do and who they are. So Adrian down here mentioned he's still in the Aviara String Quartet, cellist and a founding member, and he's also associate dean and professor at the University of Oklahoma. And he's been really instrumental in creating new arts management and entrepreneurship programs there. And he also recently was vice president for innovation at the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. As well as, this is something that I think is really cool, and maybe if I don't explain it correctly, you can correct me, but he created a multi-camera learning platform, e-learning platform, basically with self-directed angle toggling cameras, bringing to life orchestras. So I said I'm reading it, and I should just say what I think I know, but that he's created a platform where many video cameras were used to record a concert, and then you can go in and choose what view you want to watch, which I think is absolutely amazing. So then to my left, we have Jessica Meyer. She is a fabulous violist and composer. She is in the critically acclaimed Contemporary Music Ensemble Counter-Induction. And as a composer, she's written for the Grammy-winning vocal ensemble Room Full of Teeth, also for A Far Cry. She's also written for My String Quintet, Sybarit 5, and also the New Deco Ensemble. And she is an educator. She leads workshops at many schools around the country, including Juilliard and Curtis, among others. To my right, we have Tanya Bannister. She is a CAG winner of 2003, pianist, and currently the president of CAG. And she's the founder and co-artistic director of the Alpenkammer Chamber Music Festival in Austria. And she's the founder of Roadmaps, which is an artistic, humanitarian, and co-founder, what she said, which is a really incredible project. So I'm really looking forward to the conversations today. And I think seeing that all of you have really interesting kind of multifaceted careers, I think it's really neat to find out how you all kind of got to where you are. And I'd love to kind of, for each of you maybe to take a minute and talk about kind of what maybe you thought you were going to do professionally when you were a student or when you were younger, and then kind of, does it align with what you're doing now? And if not, what are you doing now, and kind of how did you get there? So let's start with Adrian.
Sure. Okay. I started the string quartet, Aviara Quartet, about in 2006. And my goal with the quartet, we said we were in it to win it. We're going to be there for 30, 40 years. We're looking at the Juilliard Quartet, the Guarneri Quartet, the Emersons. We were not going to deviate from this path. We were going to record, win a couple of competitions, get management, and then we were off to the races. We didn't need to think about anything else. We just needed to play the concerts, wear our concert tails, wait in the wings to play. If we didn't want to go to the cocktail party, we didn't need to do that. What we loved, very early on, we won Concert Artists Guild, and we learned from people like Steve Shaman, who the senior artist manager. The old team really brought us onto the idea that you had to pay your dues, that there was a certain ladder of things that you have to do in order to further your career. After about 4 or 5 years, we were actually zipped through CAG fairly quickly. We were signed with Colbert Artists fairly quickly, and we had commercial agency. And yet we were starting to see that there are some inefficiencies in the arts marketplace. We were seeing that there's some festivals that were run very well, some arts organizations that weren't run so well, some that were run by an artistic director that had no idea how to read a balance sheet, some that were run purely on a business scale without any empathy for what the arts can do and what it's about. And so I decided I couldn't be one of these people who just complained all the time about the market and how things were going. We had won the competitions. We were playing over 85 concerts a year at a given time. And we realized there was more. There had to be something more. And so I decided that if we're going to talk about the arts marketplace and business, then it behooves us to learn something about business. So I went and got my MBA from the University of Toronto, and I started to decide that I wanted to learn the language and understand better how to communicate with the people that were business people, with the people that might be on a board, with the people that would be future stakeholders. And so in a long way of saying this, I learned that my conservatory training didn't really put me up for what the 21st century was demanding of me. We went to some great conservatories. We were the graduate quartet at the Juilliard School and the San Francisco Conservatory. Wonderful institutions. And we really learned how to plumb the depths of technical excellence, of being vulnerable, of things that we really need and we treasure. But I felt that we weren't learning formal constructs of strategy, negotiations, positioning, how to actually be empathetic really is what it is. How do we actually make our art feasible through different borders?
Jessica.
Cool. Thank you. Basically, growing up on Long Island, I was from a very staunch youth orchestra culture. And I'm remembering hanging out with my dad, listening to all the symphony records. As a violist, I always thought that I'm just going to be doing an orchestra gig. That's all I thought. Yet in high school, I started composing because I just had the right amount of teachers around, getting me on computers and creating my own thing. And I started playing solo pieces. But as soon as I got into Juilliard, I kind of shut all of that creativity off and went to down the road of what I thought I was supposed to be doing. Learn your excerpts over and over again. Be able to jog up to 5 flights of stairs and be able to run the list perfectly. All the things. Shout out to Don Green. All those things. And I really thought that was going to be my life. And so but thankfully, while I was going through Juilliard, I did notice that I really identified with composers. I made friends with composers and started playing their music. So that upon graduation, when I was locking myself in a room and trying to take every audition on earth, I had started growing this other interest, which then became Counterinduction, because next year we're going to celebrate our 20th anniversary of being a composer-performer collective. Before I even realized that I needed to be a composer, I've been interpreting other people's works for so many years. But as far as upon getting out of school, I realized in school, you're constantly being told that you are to fit in a particular box. Are you in the soloist box, the chamber music box, the orchestral box? Or maybe there's a new music box just starting to happen then. And it wasn't really sort of broadly taught and accepted that actually you can create the career like that can span all these boxes in different ways, and it's really up to you to do it. It's not up to just being able to win an award or finally get on the roster. It's your constant reimagining and rebranding yourself that actually does it. So after taking however many auditions and making the finals, after missing one note or one shift, I thought maybe I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's when I developed all the new music that I've done. And then it was upon further reflection and coaching the musicians that are in Ensemble Connect at Carnegie Hall and helping them do their outreach and script a concert, that in that reflection of teaching them networking and entrepreneurship skills, that I realized that I don't think I'm actually doing what I'm supposed to be doing at all. And that's when I started to become a soloist with having my solo shows. And then I realized after composing for myself, once I started composing for others, I realized, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. It just happens to be 15 years a little bit down the line. But it's the constant reflection of self and the reinvention and this idea that you're not just going to walk out of conservatory or even walking out of winning a competition and saying, okay, this is our life, the set, we're all good, thank you very much, just let me know when the next gig is, you know. And so I feel like we're all in the same. I mean, I'm looking at all of our careers, and that's sort of what we're here to say, is that what's wonderful about this particular world we live in is that it is self-created, it's self-generated, and there are so many opportunities to engage with different people on different levels with what we do. So.
Wow, thank you so much. It's a very inspiring story. Tanya.
I started playing the piano when I was in Hong Kong, and I had a Japanese mother and an English father, and I had very, very intense training. And I had my mother, who, if I wanted to become a musician, I had from the age of 7, I was practicing the piano like 4 or 5 hours a day minimum. So basically, my world was incredibly, incredibly focused. And I guess that I had no idea what that meant later in life and how I was going to actually make a career out of doing it. But I knew that I thought my career was just playing the piano, and somehow the stars would align and that would fall into place. And why wouldn't it? Because, you know, that's a dream. And it just didn't occur to me that, you know, there was more to life than that. And I'm still grappling with that. Even with all the things I'm doing now, I still struggle with that aspect of it, and I'm guilty every minute I'm not practicing, you know. And it's not a pleasant experience, I would say, even though I love music and I love playing. So, I mean, I was very focused on every decision I made. You know, I was living alone since the age of 13 with the intention of studying with the best teachers in the world, so I lived all over the world. And then once I came back to New York, for the final time, my final move before I've actually stayed here was when I won Concert Artists Guild. I was got into the studio. I was studying with Richard Good, and I had a boyfriend here, and that was, you know, nice. So, you know, there were many things that kind of aligned to be back here, and I always wanted to live in New York. And I don't think I realized what it meant even to win CAG, and I think, you know, that informs my job now, even with the idea of what does it mean. It was just another competition. What does it mean to have management? I didn't even understand what that meant. You know, it still meant to me I should just continue just practicing and playing the piano, and hopefully the phone would ring or an email would pop in, and my, you know, my life would just continue as it had before. And, you know, I eventually got married to that boyfriend, and then I had a child. And I think many things in my career kind of happened without much intention in the beginning, I would say. I mean, I was interested in, I think I was always not wanting to be alone, because being a pianist, I think especially even more than a violist and a cellist, is so solitary. And I craved interaction with people, I think. And that may be part of the reason I with my, now he is my ex-husband, wonderful person, I started a festival in Austria, and we were lunatics enough in our 20s to think that that was a great idea and that would succeed, and it in fact did. And I think it was partly because of, you know, not wanting to fail and making sure that I continued on the path until it didn't fail. So I think that characteristic in myself has continued to this day. And now it's in its 12th year, and I don't know how the hell we succeeded in bringing a festival in our 20s into the middle of nowhere with a language I didn't speak, and somehow continued, and now it is self-standing. And then I went on through my career, and I had a child. So, there was a lot of compromise that happened with that. I don't think I hustled as much as I could have during my time as a pianist. I didn't update my website. I didn't do all the many things, and I got yelled at by certain people because I got divorced and I had a child, and there were many, many priorities that I had. My biggest priority was my son, and it was not my career at that moment, and I wanted to make sure that he was okay. Not to say that my career in music was not still my number one, love. I mean, of course, my son was equally my love, but in terms of, I was always pretty good at taking care of myself and remembering who I was. But I was conscious in the fact that I wanted to make sure that was taken care of. And so with that, I think I sacrificed some of the things I needed to do as a pianist. And as life went on, and I was trying to find meaning, as one does, and use my music for kind of connecting to the world, I guess. Again, it was a matter of trying to find connections, not just with myself and with my instrument. I didn't want to hustle every year just to so that I felt good about myself. So I had however many concerts on my website, so I felt validated as a pianist. That wasn't enough for me somehow. So that's why I started, trying to explore, and I made many mistakes. I wouldn't call them mistakes, and experimentations on what I wanted to do, and it ended up with working with people I loved. I wanted to work with people that inspired me and that helped me, had similar passions to what I did, and we started this festival called Roadmaps, which is actually having its second incarnation later this year. And it's a humanitarian artistic festival with 5 women, very grassroots, and we did our first festival on Syria, and we used music, film, documentaries, art, and it's one of the things that I felt most connected to and inspired by. And so when someone approached me about thinking about even the CAG job, to me, it's not a job. Everything I do is kind of mission-based. So it wasn't something I wanted to do because it was a job or a title. I didn't really care about that. And then it took me a long time to figure out whether this was something I wanted. And because of the process of even thinking about that, it helped to think about how could I bring those experiences of the kind of being lost a little bit. All of the things that I struggled with, maybe I could use that to benefit CAG and the younger artists coming, because I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like, but I also know that the direction is changing for the world now, and that there needs to be more relevance for music. And I think presenters, even at the conferences that we go to, I think everyone is thinking about that now. How can we make what we do impact a larger community, not just the top 2%? So that's how I came to this position. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. I think it's really interesting hearing all of your stories and how there's kind of a common thread of maybe quite a bit of unknown, and this idea of not really knowing what you should be doing, or maybe, like you mentioned, you felt like you were being kind of directed. You should do this. You should be in an orchestra. You should be a chamber musician. And I wonder if maybe we can kind of talk about that a little bit in the sense of, I think I've experienced that as well in my career. I was on an orchestra path as well, and look where I am now. It's completely different. And kind of like, maybe some advice or words of wisdom we can kind of share. How do you deal with that? And also that it's not necessarily something that the unknown will never go away, right? And that it's still happening constantly as we're evolving in our careers and kind of figuring out what our definition of success is.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic, Sarah. And I have to say, Sybarite 5, when you guys, I met you first in Aspen in 2008, right before we went to Munich, ARD, and did our whole competition route. And we remember the freshness of energy, the ideas. You still have the greatest violin chop, percussive chop that we did. Our quartet, we were always mimicking, not in terms of joking, but just like, how does Sarah Whitney do that? She has incredible rhythm,
I paid
you
him
know?
to say that.
But what we learned really was, the Sybarite Five really mined a depth in their mutual passion for Radiohead. And that really inspired me. It made me think back to, we're trying to be, we're trying to find our own ways. And we realize that it's kind of like a traffic jam. I joke with my own students, I go, okay, show me your biographies. How many of you have a love for new music? They all raise their hands. How many of you have won these competitions? They'll raise their hands. How many of you love outreach and education and giving master classes? Everybody raises their hands. And so there's very little to immediately differentiate ourselves. But if we think back to how this whole thing started, if we look back on what Tanya was saying about experimentation, we look at Bach. And Bach, in his Germanic traditions of excellence, didn't need to care about what the French were doing. But because he cared, and this is expensive to do. This wasn't like you just Google it, find them on YouTube, figure out what the French were doing. He actually had to really pay it forward, figure out ways to figure out what the French were doing. And he learned that they had certain dances, like the bourrée, the courante, gigues. They had these organ-like preludes. And as a cellist, I'm selfish. I'm basically trying to outline the fact that because Bach was interested in what the French were doing, we have the cello suites. We have the English suites for the clavier. We have Bartók, who said the most powerful music is not found in the center of the country, but at its borders, where cultures mix and mingle. And so much of this is where when we reach certain headwinds, when we did a DJ project which was inspired really from Sybarite Five's courage. To go out there playing in some of the greatest halls in the world, in Aspen's Harris Concert Hall, and playing Radiohead and having everybody love it. We realized that there is a rhyming pattern to the excellence of traditional past. That we have to, it's our responsibility to mine those things, to figure out where to go next. I'm sure Beethoven wasn't sitting there thinking about, how can I preserve the sonata form? He didn't think that, right? In fact, there's great evidence in his conversation books. He was thinking about Eastern philosophy. He was thinking about multiple deities. He was thinking about things that the Christian Viennese society weren't thinking about. And that almost coincides with his writing the Ninth Symphony, the Grosse Fugue, Opus 133, things that single-handedly heralded in the Romantic period. So that's why I'm so honored to actually be sitting next to Jessica Meyer, because I'm not a composer at all. And maybe I'll learn something about having courage to do it. But as a composer and as a performer, you mentioned your way of getting into it, but are they similar things?
I mean, I feel like for a very long time, composers were performers were composers. And it's only really been the last 100 years that we've sort of had this dichotomy. And people have been split into camps. And I feel like, in a way, our playing suffers a little bit. Because I feel like as classical musicians, we should be able to stand up and improvise a cadenza. And really what we're doing, we're just making choices about sound, as opposed to we're composing. Yes, when I'm putting ideas to paper and I'm clearly making specific decisions, yes, then we're composing. But I feel like to get to the point, back to the point in where Bach was, and Mozart, and Rachmaninoff, Paganini, all of those guys, Beethoven, where they're sitting down at the instrument, and they're just rambling around for a while until the point where I like what I just did, let me just write it down.
I'm wondering, do you think that has to do with recording and the kind of and the whole passage of that with perfection and maybe people were more brave in the past because you didn't have that?
It's really an interesting thing, because I feel like when I talk to I do a lot of workshops right now. I still do my networking and entrepreneurship workshops, but what I'm most passionate about are these awakening inner composer workshops that no matter how long you've been holding a fiddle in your hand, we can get together in groups, we can do a quick warm-up, and then you can break into groups of 4 or 5, make decisions about sound, come back and show me a 30-second piece. Doesn't matter how long you've been playing. You can even sing it if you want to.
That's great.
I need to take that workshop.
I need to take that workshop.
I love giving it, because I feel like, first of all, because this is what happens. When I started writing for myself, I became a more accurate virtuosic player. I was a good player before, and like more time I spent in the classroom. But now I feel like I'm a greater player because my ear is so connected to the sounds I want to make because I wrote them. And then once I realized what was happening to my technique because of this, I just tried to keep shifting it over to when I learned someone else's piece, that I would go and have that same connectivity. So when I see this in kids all the time, that if you give them opportunities to make things, then all of a sudden their technique, they're like, oh, I want the sound to go like this. And then they show you, and then all of a sudden they're more facile players. And so I feel like that sort of wall that's been put up all this time, I feel like that's something
people love to categorize now. It's like, if you're this, you're this. If you know, I mean, even this, we weren't sure whether you were still playing because,
right.
People don't know, are you still playing?
You can't possibly do this.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like, I've been doing a lot as a composer this year, so people are like, are you still playing the viola? I'm like, yes, I'm going to write myself a concerto next year. I got stuff to do. I'm playing the viola. But it's just people want separation. And the same thing with styles of music. I feel like it doesn't mean that one is selling out just because you're accessing pop, rock, world, African, all Latin, all the wonderful musics that exist with its own levels of virtuosity around the world. It doesn't mean you are not being as much as a classical musician by accessing those kinds of music and taking it and making it, repurposing it, and creating new things.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, you think about like the uncomfortable things about, when you made the decision to be the composer, make yourself vulnerable to be the composer. Or when, with Aviara, you guys were like, we're going to figure out how to do this differently. Or you had this hunger to kind of, figure something out in a different way. And I think about Sybarite when we were taking those risks and performing Radiohead on concert stages and also other things that we did. But it was exciting, but it was also completely terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. I mean, if you could have had like a camera in some of our conversations amongst the ensemble members about what we were doing, and are we really going to do this? Are we really going to wear jeans in Carnegie Hall? Yeah, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
But I think that also kind of, being honest about the risks that we took and how they helped us and how we learned from them is really amazing. And I wonder maybe if you have any do you have any specific examples of like a risk you took or a mistake, or not a mistake, but kind of an experimental phase that, felt really scary, but that maybe...
I have a bunch, yeah.
I mean,
a bunch, yeah. I can give a few examples, but I mean, one thing, like, wearing many hats, and I wasn't even wearing that many hats at the time, but I still remember making one of the big mistakes I think I made in retrospect was, I remember when I was pregnant, and it was about a year after I won this competition in New Orleans, and one of the prizes was to do a Wigmore Hall debut. Actually, it wasn't a debut because I'd already played there, but it was another Wigmore Hall, but it was a very important date, and I was obsessed with myself with the fact that, okay, I'm going to become a mother, but I'm still a performer. I'm still a performer, and so I have to prove to myself and to everybody else that I'm still going to perform even after I have this child. And I remember scheduling this Wigmore Hall recital it was about 4.5 months after I gave birth. And
you put lots of pressure on yourself.
It was crazy because my son, I was breastfeeding my son, and he refused to take any formula, so I was his food still. And sorry to be.
But, hey, yes. Yeah.
And I would say I think that was a big mistake that I made. And I think one has to learn that it's okay. Sometimes you can't do everything, and sometimes you should wait or choose another time. And to all the ladies out there that want to have a child, you can definitely continue with your career, and there's nothing to stop you. But just give it a second, because it is.
And we have children about the same age,
Yeah, that's true.
And I feel like, this is also something I see with women a lot. It's just there's a lot of comparison. I remember there was a very nice chamber series that I would play on every year on the Upper East Side, fantastic. And then the year after I had my son, the time went by and a different violist was on the flyer. And I even called her. I'm like, did I do something wrong? And they're like, well, no, we just figured you had a kid, so you weren't going to play. And I was like, wait. You know, and I mean, like, there's still a lot of that goes on. There's a lot of
Oh, well, there's a lot of that, yes.
a lot of fantastic, I won't name them, but amazing high-level women performers who all of a sudden they get pregnant and it's a problem. They're just, everyone's making an assumption. Even because I met my husband young, and he's a clarinetist of the Dorian Woodwind Quintet. We got married in our young 20s after meeting at Juilliard. And I remember telling someone at home immediately, I'm like, hi, I met my husband. And he's like, and I'm going to get married next year. He's like, that's a damn shame.
Oh, yeah.
Because they immediately assumed that I was just going to stop what I'm doing and not do my work as a musician. So I feel like that's a lot less now, but it's still very much out there, and it's still something that we temper all the time. And, you know, like when we travel, and I travel a lot, my husband travels a lot, but I'm the one who gets the questions of, well, you're traveling a lot.
Well,
You know, and so this happens, and I think this happens. This is a lot of professional women are dealing with this in different ways, and how we're still
Absolutely.
pursuing what we're doing, what we're passionate about, what we're really good at, and balancing. And it takes a village, as any parent will tell you. That
Oh, my goodness.
regardless of what you do, husband, wife, you know, mom, dads, moms, together, you know, you're making it happen, and you figure it out. And there are some things that are priority at certain different times, and then there are other times when you can relax and you know that if your kids are school age and you've all of a sudden got times and you're not, you know, dealing with naps, you're like, I got time now.
Yeah.
You know, and everyone makes those choices.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about. I mean, I don't have kids, but you know, I know you both very well, and I think, you know, encountering those situations, it makes me wonder about these people that are reacting this certain way. You know, what is their version of success versus yours? You know, and kind of pressing that upon you or, you know, anyone. And I think it's really interesting to think about what success really means to us, and seeing is that, you know, we all kind of went on a certain path in school and have ended up somewhere else. I think it's interesting to think about that. And do you think that your definition of success has changed?
Oh my gosh, definitely. I mean, I grew up in Asia, where joy is not really part of the equation. And, well, it isn't. It's like you work until you're really damn good at what you do, and like chamber music is for failures. If you don't make it as a soloist, then maybe you do chamber music.
I heard that teaching was for failures too.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was. I mean, I don't know. What did you? Who else grew up in Asia here? It was a little bit, yeah. So that was kind of the mentality that I grew up with. Even though I quickly have my own voice, and chamber music is for me one of the greatest forms of music, because you're having to do it yourself and work with other people. I mean, it's just amazing. But yeah, what was the question?
Oh. Has your definition of success changed?
Yeah. So now I feel like I'm very conscious of what makes me feel connected and inspired and fulfilled. Not to say that happens all the time, but I'm less concerned with what I feel is the expectation of me. And now I really try and focus on, okay, what do I want in my life now, and what's realistic? And the combination of that, do I want to be stressed out playing God knows how many concertos or this? I don't really want to hustle for that, actually, even though I love doing that, but I want a life. Right.
And I mean, the same thing for my solo show with the Looper. There are times when I'm like, why don't I have more of these lined up and like in a row? But then when I've toured with different chamber ensembles, and you're just somewhere different night after night,
Right.
Oh, yeah.
and you spend the entire afternoon in the hall, and you
Right.
don't see sunlight until like 5 o'clock to 6 when you're running to eat, and then you're coming back. Like, you forget what that means. So that's why a lot of my solo residencies right now, it's like I'm somewhere for a week.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple of concerts. I'm working with kids. I'm doing composition workshops or something, so that I'm in a community for a while. And I realized that I just sort of opted for that. That is not important for me to be like solo date, you know, and booking my thing. I have to figure out what makes the most sense for me, and also how long can I be away from home? You know, how, you know, where is it can I be the most effective, and where's my soul full?
Right. Where is
Like that,
where's
that
the
is
soulfulness?
bigger
Yeah.
than any
I
paycheck.
agree with you.
You know, am I doing everything I need to not only serve my soul and where it needs to be, but also help serve the community and people who
Exactly.
who then being in contact with all of this opportunity and art, that then they can go out and then do their thing. You know,
I
Nobody
think so.
tells you that, right? In school,
No,
nobody tells
they
you. You're
just-
just train. Then you're going to be this. You're going to be a soloist. But you don't. And nobody tells you the type of character and the type of life and the sacrifices you would have to make to do that consistently all the way through. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. For all the people that are, millions of people that are trying to be soloists, I mean, it is a never-ending hustle. Right? I mean, it is because there's always, it's a very youth-driven or fame-driven culture. So either you have to be super famous or you have to be really young and the next hottest thing. Like anything in between is kind of lukewarm. I don't know, would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, and I think that if you're a soloist, everybody thinks that you're living the dream. If you're actually doing it.
Right.
And
right.
I mean, I guess I'm not a soloist, so maybe that's not fair to say. But I guess I could speak to like the chamber music career as well as, people saying, oh, you're in a professional chamber group. You must be so fulfilled in doing everything you want. I mean, yes, it's amazing. I love being a professional chamber musician, but there's a lot of other things that I do that are really, really important to my career and inspiring to me that I need to have in my life. And it's not that I've made it being a professional chamber musician. I'm going to constantly keep evolving what I'm doing.
Yeah, like to me, success has changed, and it's kind of been part and parcel with my idea of technique. When I was in the conservatory, technique was this, I felt like I was on a donkey, or maybe I was the donkey, with a stick and a carrot in front of it. I'm always going, it's always going to be about a foot in front of my snout. And technique became this thing, this ideal that I could never quite achieve. And the way that I was able to beat technique was to realize that I wasn't going to try to play something 100 times perfect. I was going to try to play it 17 different ways and to really mine a certain thirst for exploration for my imagination. And so technique became actually measurable in terms of, if my imagination is leading this, can my hands do what my mind is telling it to do? If it can do it, then I think I have pretty good technique. Yeah. And the idea of how that parlays to success for me was that success was, as was said by my brilliant colleagues before, it's like it was an actual thing. It was, we often gravitate to certain anchors, like precedents, like the Guarneri Quartet for me and the Juilliard Quartet, because they're available, because they're easy, but not because that's actually what we want. Mm-hmm. So to really, on the same scale, to where I got through technique was to really cultivate the strength to imagine. For success, I needed to cultivate the strength to imagine what could be that hasn't been before.
Well, yeah, and I think that it's not a tangible, it's not an end goal, really. Success is constantly learning and growing and changing, I guess, in a way, right?
I mean, an analogy just struck me. One of my harpsichord buddies who went to Eastman said his professor said, good technique is being able to do what you want to do when you want to do it. And I feel like success as an artist is to be able to do the projects you want to do when you want to do them. That's a very tall order, but if you could somehow balance your life and being able to do all these different things that we do to inspire ourselves, so that, I mean, there are some careers that, yes, you are on a solo track and you are in that much demand and you are living in hotel after hotel after hotel, and that might be that way for a while. Is there a time when you don't have to do that? Is there a time where you can give yourself that break to explore different parts of yourself? And so,
Yeah,
give
isn't
yourself
it a
permission to do
tragedy?
that, yeah.
Wouldn't it be such a tragedy if you had the technique? And we know examples of this,
yeah.
where someone is just incredible, almost mechanically perfect, and you ask them what they're trying to say, and they don't know. And I've been there. I've been there when someone's tried to tell me, well, what are you really about? What is the Aviara Quartet about? And I couldn't say we want to be Guarneri Jr. because we would never be the Guarneri Jr. And there was an element where I realized it was a tragedy that I had let my imagination, that creative spark that we had talked about at the beginning, let that kind of be on the back burner, when that actually should be leading our technique in that way.
Wow. I love that.
I have a question for you, Adrian, since this is what your work, so much of your work. I mean, I was talking to, a colleague or someone that I was at Yale the other day, and talking about, like, how do you set up students for a modern career in music? And it's not just, because it was easy to say, well, when they should have more classes for entrepreneurship and on this and that, but actually it comes down to actually shifting a mindset. It's not just about teaching skills. Of course, we can all learn how to do Excel. I mean, I can sit for a weekend and learn how to do it. You just do it enough, you learn, right? But how do we shift the mindset so that we're not kind of, in our 40s figuring it out, that it would be nice to have known a lot of what I know now, in my 20s, I think,
I know you do a lot with creativity, and that seems to really be something that I think we've all touched on somehow in our
And
work.
you
And
do
I
too, yes.
feel like so much of why we need creativity, not only just to make our playing better and how we hear and how we feel music, but also like we are creating our lives out of nothing. Maybe not nothing. We clearly have our network, our people, where we've been, but we're really in charge of the path of what we need to do, and that's a creative act in and of itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so in its end, then you have to backtrack to all of our lessons as kids and in conservatories. We're too busy being told what to do and not really reflecting on what's happening. And so what if there are more opportunities that we're in charge of our own reflection and our steps we need to make forward? Because when you get out of school, I think that's the biggest thing that feels like you're going off a cliff as a student's like, I've just been told what to do for the past how many years I've been playing the violin. And now I have to figure out how to do it all myself. So it's that like practicing self-reflection early and often.
Right. Well, it's actually, even with us in the competition, we've added an element to our application process by asking for artist statements. And a lot of board members and supporters will come up to me asking me, well, why do you do that? Because maybe a 19-year-old doesn't know what they want to do yet. And my answer to that is like, well, I would struggle to write one even now. And it's not about knowing what you want to do, but it's the process of reflecting
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
writing and just seeing someone's thought process through that. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Because you do a lot of that kind of work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think I have any real concrete answers as much as a certain framework that I found has worked for me. And it's so much that I was really touched by what you said, Tanya, when you said, any minute you're not practicing, you feel guilty. And it almost meant like, yeah, right? Any minute that we weren't dedicating to the perfection of our craft meant that it was like an arms race with the next guy. Right? Like, oh, he did 5 extra hours than me, so I'm not going to go to that party. But like, I remember concerts I missed, like big collaborative events. I don't remember a practice session that I skipped to be fed, to have my imagination fed or led in a certain way. And I would say that so much of the technique, the pursuit of excellence has to be there, and the structures are very strong. But there's an example that comes from ecology, from nature, where you have 2 different ecosystems meet. They call that the edge effect, where that intersection happens. You actually have a multiple of 3, the species, the life, flora, and fauna. So for instance, where the grassland meets a body of water, you usually have a marsh where the grass grows taller. And a fish won't be in the middle of the forest or the grasslands. A deer won't be in the middle of the body of water. But at its intersection, they both coexist. And so we see a certain analogy to how we should live our lives. That we have to live our lives in order to be good artists. We have to have empathetic experiences which work as a body for empathy, a structure of empathy. And that actually feeds that imagination which should lead the technique. That's kind of what we're doing at the University of Oklahoma to try to give well-rounded musicians a chance as citizen artists, as Dr. Polizzi from Juilliard famously wrote about. But that idea often gets headwinds because they're saying, well, are you saying that they shouldn't spend an extra hour in the practice room? And when I answer, maybe not, that usually gets me into some trouble.
Wow. I think I would maybe love to shift the conversation just slightly, because I think one thing that I've found that I get a lot of questions about is kind of looking at, we've talked about all the many things that each of us does as administrators, as composers, as artists, as performers, as teachers, at everything we do, kind of finding a way to juggle it all and how we pull it off. And I think, today it's such a hot topic, no one has enough time for anything, right? And so I wondered if you could maybe just speak to kind of what are things that you do that allow you to juggle all the many things and then also take care of yourself at the same time?
Well, one of the things I really learned was I'm a better artist when I am investing in other activities. I don't think I'm a worse cellist for having built a spreadsheet or built up a language to be able to talk about my project within another sense. And I feel that has been a real drive for me to be able to excel or the drive to excel in multiple different hats. I run a concert series in Vancouver, a summer festival in Vancouver. I'm also at a university, and I'm still playing. And I'm also a research professor. So, but all those things get to feed into each other. Your idea about self-care and how I probably learned from my panel colleagues here, because here I am like hobbling around on one foot.
You're not hobbling. You scooted incredibly
You
fast
rolled in really well.
into the room.
Yeah, you can get around faster than I can. I mean,
Exactly.
I was at the airport and someone was like, "Where can I get one of those?" Because you're going like way
I want
faster
one,
than me. And I was like,
one.
"Well, you have to screw up your foot."
Here's some questions. Yeah.
great. Well, do you guys want to speak to that question, and then we can?
I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard, and you have to prioritize because the hustle doesn't end, and you just have to choose what your hustle is a particular day. I feel like, is it that I need to sit down and write this grant, make this spreadsheet, write those 15 emails of not even responding emails, but like, hey, what do you think of this email? And then time you practice, time you take, like you go for a walk, time you spend, with friends and family. I mean, it takes planning, and it takes you almost being a ninja about, does this really need to be here? Do I really need to do this right now? Is this the best use of my time?
How about discipline, right?
Yeah, it takes
yeah.
the
So
discipline
much.
it takes to practice well is the same discipline you need to be able to do this life. Because if it was just the one thing and locking yourself up until it's perfect, well, there is no perfect, but also just you're missing out on all these other things that can inform your life. That concert that you didn't get to, or that coffee date with a colleague that was only in town that time, and actually talking with them really inspired a whole bunch of chain reactions in you. I think everyone makes these choices to let some moments slide, and it's just constantly asking yourself, like, what really needs to be here to be able to do all these things. And especially what you mentioned about teaching, and like teaching is, failing. As a teaching artist for 20 years, it always gets me. It's like, well, that means you don't play anymore. I'm like, yes, I do. But I'm a curriculum specialist for Juilliard. I travel the world helping K through 12 teachers teach better and kids being able to be in touch with their creativity. I feel like when I work in those situations, then my heart is full, and I go home, and that inspires my own creativity, and that made me notice about how I'm teaching any given thing. I mean, it's all circular. Ask anybody why they still play, or why they teach the X many students a week, or why that they're making time to meet with this person because of a potential project that, if it really all worked out, would just make so many people feel full. But that takes time, and it's just being a ninja about it, really. So,
Ninjas, we're all ninjas, guys.
Yeah. We are. We have to be. Exactly. But I agree with that. I think learning what can go for that day, and prioritizing, and it does shift from not even day by day, but hour by hour. What can I get away with not doing this hour? But yeah, it's been really hard. This is the first year of this job for me, and I've never been responsible for an organization of this size before. I've started my own nonprofits, but they were much smaller. And, I've also learned a concerto and a bunch of new chamber works this year, actually, since September. And it was a Herculean effort, I have to say. It was torture. The music was complete It enriched me. It gave me a different type of joy that it's never given me before, because it was a space for me. But to carve out the time was very, very difficult. I'm not going to lie. You know, I would have to get up early, and I would have to forego going to the gym, or I would have to forego having breakfast with my friend. I would have to practice. I have a electric keyboard in the office. I would have to do some time in the office. So I would sometimes come home exhausted after dinner with board members or donors or a concert, which happened a lot. And I'd come back and I'd practice another hour and a half because I knew I had to do it. I think I'm experienced. I think we're experienced enough in our careers now. What needs to be done to actually be ready in time for a performance? And maybe I'm a adrenaline junkie. I have no idea, you know. But someone asked me what my hobby was, and I was like, hobby? You know?
Oh yeah, I never know what to do with that question.
I
That's
really
so
don't
like
know what to
that.
do with that question, you know. It's like, because our lives are our passions, and I was scratching my head. I don't know what my hobby is, you know. It's kind of sad, yeah.
You know, I was playing video games once, and I just realized I'm so good at playing video games. Why do I hate practicing?
Right.
And I realized I'm actually mashing buttons for about 6 hours. I'm practicing. So how do I cultivate the same fun with the cello, or going to that cocktail party where I have to meet a bunch of strangers? And I found that cultivating the fun was fantastic, because when you're having fun, I think that we all get better at what we're trying to do. But then when somebody asks us, what do you do for fun? You're like, well, everything and nothing.
Exactly.
Cultivating the fun should be like a T-shirt, I think, you know.
Well, I love what you said about, you know, finding what you said about technique, about finding 17 ways to play one thing. You know, I mean, that's really, gosh, I'm going to write that down, and I'm going to take that home to my practice room tonight. I mean, but you know, I think it's interesting. We've all talked a little bit about discipline, and I just kind of want to echo what you said, Jess, about, you know, if we all have the discipline to practice and learn our instrument at a very high level, which we all do, and you know, so many people, those skills can be, you know, translated to managing different things in your career. I mean, one thing that I had to do when I had to discover the early mornings, you know, I found that especially when I'm on tour, the only time I have control of is the early morning. I can look at my day and I can say, oh, I might have a window there or an hour there, but inevitably it might get taken up by a longer commute, or the presenter wants to take us out to coffee or whatever. But the early mornings, and I say to people, yeah, I love the early mornings. It's my time. And people say, I could never do that. I could never do that. But if you talked to me 2 years ago, I would have said, no way.
Try being a parent.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
But it really does come down to discipline and just taking responsibility and
Absolutely,
kind of knowing that you can make the change. Maybe you don't want to. Maybe, it's going to be hard. It was really hard for me to shift my schedule. But it took the discipline that I know I possess that quality. And I think it's something that we all can be reminded of.
You have to build your life around the life you want.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that's building is the operative word.
Yep.
We have questions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's take a question. So we're going to take a question from Gigi, who is on the CAG roster. She's a guitarist. And I think it actually works very well into what we've been talking a lot about. The question is, what do you think music schools should teach students to become a well-rounded 21st century musician? And I want to just kind of add to that, like, what did you not feel prepared for? Which I think goes along with our training.
Nobody prepared me I remember very early arriving at Juilliard, Shirley Greitzer, rest in peace. She was an amazing woman, but she also kind of corralled us in this room and said, you guys are chosen. And everything is going to be great after today. You know, and it was just this idea of like being, it was fed that's like, you were chosen, you got into the school, and now everything's going to be provided. This, instead of the idea of like, well, no, actually, it takes practice, but also the social aspect. Like, if you're not front of mind, people won't think of calling you, hiring you, thinking of collaborating with you. And it's like in business, but they call it front of mind. And that to be front of mind, social media has helped a lot with that. You know, sometimes even too much, but nothing replaces you're having that conversation with the person and talking about potential things, or going out for that drink, or going out for that coffee. And so I remember getting out of school, realizing all the time I wasted not doing that, making sure I sought out other colleagues that wow, I love what they're doing. Let's just keep in touch about those things. So I feel like that's the number one thing. And I think they're getting wise to that, about the idea of socially, what do musicians need to do to be connected? Because everybody, to this day, I mean, people that I know from 20 years ago are still the people we have these really big connections with, because college is a really amazing time.
But every single student around you, all the people you're in class with, they're all going to be your colleagues in the real world.
Exactly.
Every single one of them. And some of them may go into music. Some of them might not. Some of them might go into PR or maybe lawyers or, actually people that can help you in other ways.
Yeah.
And all those people will.
But we get
be
so stuck
resources.
in our little, like, pianists hung out with pianists,
Yep.
strings hung out with
Yep.
strings, and we didn't talk to singers. I mean, why
Yeah.
would we talk to a singer?
Who are they?
Or
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, right? I mean, it's just, and those are the types of connections, like the dance department, the theater department, the lighting department.
It's very
all of
siloed.
these, yes.
Very
and
siloed.
that I wish had been much more. I wish the school had instigated that a little bit more, and encouraged experimentation, and making mistakes and giving opportunities for that. That's what I wished. I mean, I hope it's changed. I'm sure it's changed since I was I was in school.
And there's a lot more teaching artist initiatives where kids, I think it's even part of your final recital process that participants have to get up and they have to say
Right.
something before
Actually,
a piece
yes.
and
I
engage the
actually don't-
audience.
Now that the applications have come in for this year's competition, I actually don't think it's changed that much, actually. Looking at a majority of people's programming ideas, I don't think they're encouraged to think outside the box. I don't think young musicians know that most of them won't be booked for Schubert and Brahms recitals right off the bat. And that, I think we're not trained for the realities of the market.
But
right
to be
now.
able to speak to your audience from the stage
Oh, yeah,
and
I mean,
engage
that's a
them and
given,
meet them
yes.
halfway, knowing
Yeah.
your New York audience is going to be very different from your Idaho audience, from your California audience.
But with what you said, with what are you trying to communicate beyond your technique? And sometimes I feel like, what are you trying to say? You can blah, blah, blah about, and Beethoven and but what actually is I mean, I think, and constantly trying to reflect on that is important.
Or
Right?
if you look at social media, why certain celebrities' Instagram things blow up, because they're giving you a window into their own everyday lives and what makes them accessible. Like they're like you, but they're feeling this from this way or that way.
Yeah.
And so when you get on stage, you're there. This is the prime moment where you can give people a window as to your inner world of how you're interacting with this piece and giving them a platform for interacting
But
with the piece.
I struggle with this. So just I struggle with this because I come from a very perfectionist kind of mentality that's been feeded into me. And for me, sharing on social media, I mean, I do it, but it's like I'm so worried. I wouldn't want to share a little snapshot of me practicing, God forbid. God, I barely even record my own recitals because I'll never sound as good as I hope I will, I mean, even with a photograph, I'm like, God, I look awful. My mother's like, that's just how you look, So it's the same with... We love our moms.
We do.
What's funny about social media is I often meet very gregarious, charismatic people, and then suddenly when it comes to Twitter or Snapchat or Facebook, they suddenly go like, I don't know what to do. And when I look at their feeds, and I even look at my feed, I'm not actually, it would be akin to going into a party where everybody's talking and then you choose to stand in the corner and just stare at everybody. And then I go well, I don't know what to do in social media. And so so much of what I had to learn was exactly, I didn't want to put anything out there that could bite me or put anything out there that, you know what I mean?
I still
but
feel that.
we can have conversations about things that we are comfortable with.
Yeah.
And that's how I was able to try to wade myself in. But there's a whole element of the stigma that we don't learn. Back to your question, Sarah, about in school, we learned theory, harmony, all these things that are, no matter what, cerebral constructs, right? We learned them mentally. And those of us who are lucky that we're able to figure it out, we are able to master it to a point when we're playing our concerts. We're not thinking about an Italian flat six chord. We're not thinking about, the nuts and bolts of this car that we're racing. We've been able to learn it to forget it in that moment so that we can synthesize these complex packages of information and synthesize it into an organic narrative to speak us, to tell a story. And so to answer your question, I feel like we don't we do teach people how to audition for orchestras, right? Like there's a very specific formula for what you're supposed to do. But we don't teach people exactly negotiations. And we negotiate all the time. Ask my wife, ask my 2-year-old daughter. We're negotiating all the time. How much time she has with my phone, that's a negotiation. But what I learned was that, we would never practice after the concert. We would never start painting after the exhibition. Why did we never practice negotiations or understand what's at play? So I think that to answer Gigi's question, that's one of the specific things. Strategy is so important. Learning that strategy is not what you're going to do, it's as much what you're not going to do. Strategy as much as visualizing and then working backwards. Too often we just think about the first 2 steps. We're not thinking about
The
where
backwards
it is.
mapping,
Yeah,
how you can really go, yeah.
And those things are all things that business people know, but I don't know why it had so little exposure when I went through my conservatory training.
Well, I think also something that's important to mention is that those things can all be learned too. I think I've spoken to people who say, "Oh wow, Sarah, you're so good at networking, or you're good at certain business skills or whatever." But it's not that. It's just that my personality lends me to be good at them. It's that you can learn these. I can study them. And you mentioned business school. Yeah, business school has classes for a whole list of things that are just kind of mainstream in that curriculum. And it always is astonishing to me that it's not mainstream in the music schools, because essentially what we're all doing is running our own businesses and kind of using these skills or learning them by trial and error. So I think it's really interesting. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Go ahead.
I think just not be afraid to really reflect on what makes you uniquely you, both as a person, as an artist, and as a musician. I feel like those are actually 3 different things that can coexist all together, and to spend some time creatively dreaming on how you can somehow pave a path so that you are able to interact with all of those things.
I often think about how I rolled in here. I've only done it maybe twice, 2 or 3 times, right? But I knew that I could navigate what was going to come up in front of me. I didn't worry about something that was unexpected. And so if there's one thing, it's to have that creative confidence, that whatever you're putting into yourself, that you lean on that, and to not freak yourself out. So much of my entire life has been changed by what happens in this one square foot. Is there a square foot here? I have a small head. So everything has happened up here. It is I would say, to echo what Jessica was saying, it is to have that creative confidence to explore.
I think for me, what I've learned is that there are resources, whether it be the people we build relationships with, so many things are right at our fingertips. And often we just keep looking around everywhere and we forget what's right in front of us. And really listening to colleagues, friends, mentors, even using social media to ask questions, to interact. There are so many ways of connecting and making real connections. So I feel like that's something I think about all the time, is not always seeking elsewhere, but trying to use what's right there,
I think I kind of want to say 2 things, I guess. But I think, not knowing is okay. And I still live that. I really honestly do. I don't exactly know what I want to do or what I'm doing maybe, but I think the choices I make kind of are things that I'm inspired about, and I kind of try to go with my gut, and that's in many ways kind of led me to where I am today, and I'm going to continue doing it. And I think also, we've talked a little bit about risk and mistakes or failures or whatever you want to call it, but I think one thing that I've learned is that in many ways, I've learned the most from those moments or those things. And I think it's important to first know that you're going to have them. And second, to, just to know that you will learn from them. And I think that that's been a really huge part of why I've been successful, or my definition of success, I guess. But yeah, so
Well, thank you all so much.
Yeah,
I
thank
can't
you.
thank you
Thank you
enough.
so
Thank you
much.
to everybody
Thank
for
you for
listening.
coming,
Thank you.
watching.
I'll see you next time. I don't know when that's going to
That's
be
a
yet,
wrap.
but we'll keep.